This is from the Gospel according to John, chapter 20. And it looks like a whole lot of verses. Okay. Now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early, while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." Peter then came out with the other disciple, and they went toward the tomb. They both ran, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. And they stooped to look in. He saw the linen clothes lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb. He saw the linen cloths lying, and the napkin, which had been on his head, not lying with the linen cloths, but rolled up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple, who reached the tomb first, also went in, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not know the scripture, that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to their homes, but Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. And as she wept, she stooped to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white, sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head, one at the feet. And they said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "Because they have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." Saying this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing. But she did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom do you seek?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you've laid him, and I will take him away." And Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which means teacher. And Jesus said to her, "Do not hold me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father, but go to my brethren and say to them, I'm ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and said to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. The Gospel of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Keep it. Let us remember that we are always together in the place of blessings, radiant on the pulse of all that ever was, all that is, and all that will be. We are always together in the place of blessings. So what is it about this story? Now, not all of you know all the narrative plot points, but just to say, this story is about a Palestinian Jew, a prophet, a healer, who was crucified, buried, and rose again. It is a story about love and death and loss and betrayal and torture and revolution, friendship, magic, miracles, redemption, grief, heartbreak, justice, political upheaval, occupation, transformation, grace, and liberation. It has all of that in it. And finally, it is a story that shows that love is as strong as death. that the inbreaking of divine love has the power to transmute matter, to push open the tombs of our hearts and the heart of the world. It is as contemporary now as it ever was. What we are after here is Christ consciousness, the power of the awakening of God consciousness in our hearts, where consciousness pierces the veil of matter and life energy, which is available to us here and now, no matter our race, our sexuality, our religious affiliation. In fact, it is indeed the way in which we can embody life and Christ consciousness in this world, in this moment. And so today, as we go through the story, there's some significant moments where I invite us to join our story with this story. It is a very human story. It's not exactly about the fecundity of rabbits, the potentiality of eggs, although that is part of its lineage. We are in the Feast of Passover, which of course is the lineage that Jesus holds. But it is a very human story. It is a very personal story. And so, let us take a moment and live into this incredibly poignant scene that Elizabeth read from the Gospel of John. Here's Mary. Mary loves Jesus. They have a deep, enduring relationship. There's a lot we could say about the relationship of Mary Magdalene and Jesus. And next year, Elizabeth Cunningham, who's written this story, will probably preach. But for the moment,
No, not necessarily.
well, we will bring another dimension to that. But for our purposes this morning, these are two people who have profoundly shared a life and ministry and love together. And you hear the other disciples, they go in, they look, they get all fussy about the linen napkins, God knows. The funeral rites of Judaism are specific, but they go, well, he's not here. Basically, the tombstone is rolled away, but he's not here. But Mary stands by the tomb, and she's weeping, right? The stone is rolled away, and she's weeping. She's weeping, and she's compelled to find out what happened to him. She has the urgency of heartbreak and grief that compels her to stay. And indeed, in that moment, out of her grief and out of her love, Jesus appears to her in transcended form, and he calls her by name. When we are called by name, we find our way in love, no matter what the cost. And so this is a very personal story of friends, a tribe that goes through enormous political, emotional, devastating upheaval. Crucifixion is an extraordinarily brutal torture. And so here we are, and here's Mary standing at the tomb in her heartbreak, and Jesus appears to her. So that's a very personal story. So then I invite us to consider in this immediate moment in our lives, where are our hearts entombed? Where is the stone in our heart that we could, in our grief and longing for deliverance, imagine opening? So take a moment and consider a place within yourself where you long for redemption, and that despite every effort and spiritual practice and horrific upbringing or beautiful teaching you've ever had, there's still a place where we're held, where there's a stone in our hearts, where we wish for deliverance, where we can imagine what it might be like to live our lives where that stone was moved and released. So take a moment to consider where the stone in your heart is and what it is that would allow you to believe in the grace and power of some miraculous intervention that could open it. Or better yet, consider a time in your life where you stood at the bedside of your beloved who was dying, or a time when you thought no matter how messy your life is, how broken you might be feeling, or some enormous surrender that you couldn't possibly imagine how it might resurrect and become something else. So consider either where the stone in your heart seeks to move, or where indeed you can recall where it did. And take a stone, take two stones actually, and put that stone of your personal heartbreak, the place where, like Mary, you are standing at the tomb in your grief and in your longing, and allow whatever it is that arises in your heart, put it in the stone. Is that clear what I'm asking? Sort of. Right? Just a note here. There's so much that has been committed in a horrific way by the overarching mandate of Christianity in its function institutionally. But we have the opportunity to live it differently. And it's important to note that Mary was the first person who Jesus appeared to in his resurrection appearances. The first person that Jesus appeared to was a woman. And her response to that miracle of death becoming love was, "I have seen the Lord." So each of us have a moment, or I invite you to find it, where you might say, "I have seen the Lord." Some epiphany, some dramatic breakthrough where the stone in your heart moved, where you had a profound experience of indeed what feels like a miraculous and perhaps incremental shift, where the stone in our hearts can move or has moved. So while this story is a very personal story of love and loss and grief and death, it's also a very political story. It is a story of a man whose sacrifice and execution, whose death was the source of an historical revolution of epic proportion. Whatever we want to say about the wrongness of actions in Christianity, this story endures. It's enduring, and it is indeed ubiquitous. And consider how many people today have been brutally executed for their sexuality, their racial identity, their religious beliefs, their political views. Jesus was, in effect, the scapegoat. He was a martyr. He was holding a truth that in the end he was killed for. And today, this is as true then as today. It is as true now as it was then. We don't have to go very far to look at the travesty of human brutality and suffering and execution and death and genocide that still currently exists. So take a second stone. Has everybody got 2 stones? Mm-hmm. So in this stone, the political stone, and I invite you to make the connection between your personal stone and the political stone. So where is it in your life, your connections, your lineage, your ancestors, the place in the world, a cause that calls you, that you can put a vision for how the stone of the world could be moved? And I invite you to think about where your personal stone intersects specifically with the political stone. Because after all, that's the power of this story. That where our own grief and shame and challenge is, or loss, is also where we have the chance to transmute that in the larger realm. So consider something that calls to you in this current political moment, in which you can envision the world where no shame or violence no longer dominates, where you wish to bring healing, where you have an intention about what in the political realm here of this story of Jesus's life and witness that you wish to put into that stone. And you might think about where they intersect. Is that clear, the point I'm making? Because where our own shame and humiliation or place of not knowingness is part of how it gets replicated in projection and atrocity and genocide and brutality. So we begin in our own hearts. And from our own hearts flows the change that we will be in the world. We think it's out there, it's here, and it's there, and that's the power. This is a personal story, and it's a political story. And let us remember that we're in the season of Passover, which is about the feast of liberation from enslavement, which was part of Jesus' lineage as a Jew. So, in effect, where would you find a next year in Jerusalem moment in your own life and vision for the world? So in a few moments, I'm going to invite you to come up and offer your stones to the sacred waters. But let me just end by saying that we will share a ritual meal here of Eucharist. And we share this ritual meal. We do it together because the weight of the stones is more than we can bear alone. And so we engage in a ritual meal together to support this in ourselves and in the world. And in the Episcopal Church, we call it real presence of communion. So it's not just an idea, it's a shared action where we know that whenever we break bread and pour out wine, wherever we bring our broken places, our bleeding, beautiful hearts, there's a promise. There is a promise we will find and touch a great mystery. That death becomes life, that grief becomes love, that inhumanity becomes justice. So all are invited to share the Eucharist despite whatever religious beliefs or ideologies you hold as you feel called to. But know that you're in the circle of communion where this mystery is being held. Amen. Amen. So please come forward.